It goes completely against the grain of most time travel stories. Paradoxes are embraced rather than explained away. This week, Kumar and Emmet discuss Rachel Pollack and Chris Weston's 5-issue 1997 miniseries Time Breakers, the most popular series of DC's canceled imprint Helix. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support.
This is Emmet.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Emmet in the wild outskirts of country Victoria.
Yeah, awesome.
And I've got Kumar on the line. He's in Melbourne.
I'm in the suburbs. I'm kind of a bit far out.
Much more gentrified part of Victoria.
Definitely. That's true, at least.
Yeah, I like to keep folks in this podcast abreast of my live wildlife situation.
Yeah.
We had snakes recently. I spotted a rat the other day. Did I tell you the story of the bat that came into my bedroom?
No, I hadn't heard this one.
I might have mentioned in the previous recording with Tim, but there was a crack in the ceiling, and a bat squeezed through the crack into my bedroom.
Whoa, okay. So it was a little one.
It was they've got collapsible spines.
Yes.
I knocked him out of the air with a fly swatter, put him in a plastic bag, and released him outside, and he flew away, so he's fine. I have felt no compunction to fight crime. I feel compelled to say that every time I share this anecdote.
Yes.
And so my cat is basically living under siege right now because she can smell all this stuff going on.
Yeah.
It's all happening.
And it was a poisonous snake, right?
Yeah, brown snake. Yeah,
and somebody came out to take care of it, or what happened?
Yeah, somebody came out, but they were gone because they moved very fast.
Okay.
Our neighbors have also spotted another one, which is much, much bigger than the one we had.
Okay.
So we had a little baby one. They had a much bigger one. So they're around. We live near the bush.
Yes.
We live you've been here.
Yeah.
We're right next to the bush. Yeah. So, this is the situation.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, we're here to talk about comics, not my incipient dealings with wildlife in the Australian outback.
Yeah.
We are here to talk about Rachel Pollack's Time Breakers.
Yeah.
Which was a Helix imprint miniseries of 5 issues. Well, I say miniseries. Who knows? There may have been more, but Helix famously folded.
It seems pretty complete. I can't imagine any way it could have carried on. It seems like a very
given the nature of the story. Given the nature of the story, I can absolutely see it continuing on in a perverse sort of, well, let's just keep going, because it's all about paradoxes. But yeah, from what I've read, Time Breakers was one of the Helix books that actually did sell.
Okay, interesting.
But Helix itself, as an imprint, was particularly successful. They salvaged Transmetropolitan.
Yes.
So that went on to another life in Vertigo and DC.
Yeah.
But Time Breakers, I'm not sure. Was this like the end of Rachel Pollack's work with DC, more or less?
I don't know. Yeah, it was 1997.
That was sort of her era, because then you got the Doom Patrol before that. A couple of things here and there. But yeah, Time Breakers is a really interesting story because, as she highlighted in the Comics Journal article, wonderful interview with her, which we've talked about the last time we talked about Rachel Pollack on our Doom Patrol episode. She just it came out of her argument that time travel stories are all wrong.
Yes.
It's all about repairing time, fixing time, and making. Whereas this is Time Breakers. Let's blow time up.
Yeah, I love a time travel story, and this one is really very different in just the central premise of it. But should we talk about why we're here talking about this? Because again, I didn't discover until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I never heard of Rachel Pollack. And then I saw some article. It must have been an article about the Goofy superheroes, and it must have been about Codpiece. And that must have been the first time I heard about her. And then I was like, okay, let's look at this Doom Patrol run. But
and
until then, I never.
It's fascinating to see how Pollack's been reassessed, because Codpiece
is the best.
Codpiece turned up in the Harley Quinn cartoon show.
Right.
Show. Yeah.
And Doom Patrol. The Doom Patrol TV series.
But Doom Patrol and Harley Quinn.
Wow.
Codpiece is back in a big way.
Yeah.
I think you'd like me saying that. Okay. Codpiece is big and hard and ready. We are talking about this as well because we wanted to give Rachel Pollack a shout out and her work a shout out, because recently, at the time of recording, Neil Gaiman has shared that her health is quite poor, and there was this sense of, her life is coming to an end. Now, amusingly, similar to the Sam Neill situation, I don't know if you've seen this, because Sam Neill, the story broke that he had a very aggressive form of blood cancer.
Okay.
And he was seeking treatment, and he then had to take the camera himself days ago now. And he was like, I'm not dead yet. I'm here. I'm in remission for 8 months. It's fine. I'm here. I want to work. Give me work. I don't want my agent to stop taking my calls. He's got a book to promote,
Yes.
Similar situation. Pollack sent word to Gaiman. Basically, I'm not dead yet.
Right. But it seemed to be her wife had sent this message to Neil Gaiman saying, prepare the obituaries. And that was what he... I think they're just trying to de-escalate some of the excitement around. Okay. It's quite ghoulish, really. Yeah, sure.
But in that space, I still want to take the opportunity to talk about Rachel Pollack, because I'll take any opportunity to celebrate her work.
Yes.
I am, at the time, as we speak, drinking a glass of wine. The name of the wine is Taro, and that's my little nod to Rachel as well.
Did you end up reading her Fourth World stuff?
That's still on the list with myself and Tim. I still want to do that.
Okay.
I have read some of it.
Okay.
But I'd like to have a dedicated read through with Tim.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm just really enjoying the experience of going to the Fourth World stuff. But her approach consistently has been to upend what we think we know about the different properties that she's invited onto.
Yeah.
And with Timebreakers, she's taken that approach to the entire concept of the time travel story.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that Helix also published work by Michael Moorcock, because I can see him he has a similar notion of, I'm just frustrated with this. It's basically you're telling the same story again.
Mm-hmm.
The other exception to this rule that I would mention, and I feel obligated to mention this every time we get into these waters, I think the last time we spoke, I gave Sapphire and Steel a shout out as well. I'll do it again.
Yeah.
Because Sapphire and Steel was also a time travel show.
Yeah, right.
On UTV back in the early 80s. But in that show, time itself, time as a thing, was the antagonist. Right. So the agents were actually fighting against time. Time is like this wild animal that's just having to be corralled by these rational actors, Sapphire and Steel, who are these elementals traveling through time, to keep it in some sort of order. You see something similar in the recent Loki miniseries in Disney Plus, where time has a limited frame that it needs to stick within, and it turns out that framework is entirely conceived of by, well, that'd be spoiling it if you haven't seen the show, but it's again, it's this sense of time is a construct. Time isn't something that simply is. It's an invented thing.
Right.
Pollack's idea here is that time is contradiction. Time is paradox.
Or that the paradoxes are necessary.
Exactly.
In the time stream, they have to
perpetuate itself through paradox.
Yeah. So I think her approach is basically, or the conceit of it is that she's taking things that happen on a quantum level, like electrons moving faster than light and going back in time and creating themselves, or other things like waves of probability being flattened, and she's applied it on the macro level, on the on the scale of living people. So that's, of course, the central problem of physics of the past 50 years, is that they can't resolve the way that stuff functions on the quantum level. Stuff doesn't work like that once you get above a certain size, and they've been trying to figure out why this is and how to make them work together. But she's just like, okay, it works the same way, essentially. So the paradox of or the grandfather paradox, which she doesn't call it that, but go back and kill your own grandfather, and then how are you alive if you weren't born, and then you wouldn't have killed him if you weren't born, which means he would be alive. It's sort of that loopy stuff, which makes you insane. In this comic, it's like, that's the whole point of it. Well, don't think about it, because it will make you insane, but that's the way it has to be. The electrons have to go back in time to create themselves, and we have to create these, I think they call them closed loops of time, where there's this group called the Time Breakers, which exists solely to create paradoxes. And she is recruited into this. In 1958, this woman, Angela Attenborough, is recruited into this group by three people, a woman and two men. And she discovers that the woman that recruited her is herself. And it's like, well, how did the loop start? There is no start, and that's the paradox of it. But that's the way it's supposed to function. And they're like, everyone is always telling her, don't think about it. It will make you insane. And yes, it doesn't make sense. She doesn't try to make sense of it. She's like, it's not supposed to make sense. And we need those loops for the universe to exist. We need those electrons to go backwards and create themselves. Otherwise, the universe doesn't get created, all that kind of stuff.
Which all sounds very heady, I'm sure, and it's going to give some people listening a bit of a headache. But there is a sense with this book of Pollack and Chris Weston, great.
Oh yeah, we haven't mentioned him.
Well, I wanted to shout him out because, he's also worked on a similar book for 2000 AD called Indigo Prime.
Okay.
With John Smith, which again had, well, let's just take the piss out of time travel stories. Let's just go nuts with it.
Yeah.
Let's not take it seriously at all. And there's a playfulness at work here. And part of why Chris Weston's such a great collaborator is that he has this line detail.
Oh yeah.
This the much purported realism that certain people look for in their comic art, and then he draws ridiculous things. And this is something he did maybe to the extreme with Grant Morrison in The Filth.
The Filth, yeah.
Same idea, where you've got hyper detail of like ridiculous situations, absurd things. The Time Breakers themselves, there is a disappointing moment where they appear in uniform, but typically they appear as themselves from their local point of history, wherever they were, taken from. Like Aitken, who's a recurring character, and in the TCJ interview, she highlighted that she had asked readers to, did they recognize where she took that from? And no one did. And it's Odysseus's pseudonym when he comes back to Ithaca and he wants to hide his identity. So she's playing with all these things. Aitken typically travels around. When we first meet him as a gentleman from a Greek island.
Wait a second. Can we jump ahead for a second? Didn't the leader of the Time Breakers, didn't he go looking for Homer and was unable to find him?
Yes, which is a kind of a hint as to what's going on.
Gotcha.
With him.
All right.
Because I don't want to spoil anything, but this book ends on a big nod to Robert Louis Borges, which is the whole thing too. Yeah, sorry. So there's this playfulness to it because characters just walk on as themselves in the time period, and it gets Weston the opportunity to just draw all this stuff.
Yes.
So it's just like this sense of kids just messing around with like multiple Lego sets and just mixing them all up. And that is the joy of time travel, because so many people get obsessed with working out the logic of it. And characters repeatedly say in this, ignore the logic, or don't logic this. I think that's an actual line. Don't logic this, because it's just don't worry about it. We're here. And
if you logic it, the universe cannot exist in this series.
And it gets to the point where even the rules, dramatic tension, are upended within this comic, whereby Angela figures out what's going on at a certain point. She figures out the whole mystery behind it, and she goes to bed with her boyfriend for sex. That's what she does.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what's the point? Let's just go have fun. And that's kind of this comic to me. It's let's just play with these ideas and see. And I'm going to make a reference to this here, and I'm going to make. But it's not important. You don't need to read Borges to get the reference. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's just there. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but one of my favorite lines of dialogue, and the dialogue did pull me up short at first, because I did have this moment of well, I don't know if this is period accurate, and
well,
it was like,
why are they all speaking English? It's a real Star Trek kind of thing. Like these people from all over the world, from every age, and she really goes out of her way to include people from everywhere, from every culture is in here. Especially when Angela first arrives at the what's it called, the headquarters, which is at the beginning of time.
When life doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, this is really interesting because time, conceptually, I guess, time doesn't exist unless there's something to experience it, a living thing to experience it or think about it. So there's not
It's very George Berkeley. Essay et percepti. But yeah, there's the line of dialogue, which I just wanted to throw this into the conversation quickly.
Yeah.
I'm going to perform this very quickly. I come before you bearing secrets.
Yeah.
Secrets. And knowledge of God. And I go, oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I have to say the Chris Weston art, it kind of surprised me because, when we were reading Doom Patrol, one of my problems was I thought the art was sometimes weak. But I thought maybe she had a kind of loose writing style. So I was really surprised that they seem to really mesh. They seem to be very much on the same page about what this book needed to be. And it needed to be drawn in a realistic way because of the craziness of it. It needed to be grounded in a so you can see the room that you're in and all that kind of stuff and see the characters and know exactly what's going on at all times.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that a situation with Morrison and the Invisibles where I want to say it was Ashley Wood had done a pivotal chapter towards the end of the Invisibles.
Okay.
It was published.
Okay.
And Morrison wasn't happy with it because Morrison was saying it's too abstract. So then Chris Weston was brought in, I thought, to redo it and again have that sort of tangibility to it. And if the timelines work out, I do wonder if they were all sitting around in the Vertigo office looking at Timebreakers and going, well, let's get Chris on this.
Yeah.
I've always liked Ashley Wood's work, so I actually regret not seeing the original issue because, or I don't know if maybe it wasn't published, but I thought it was because I thought that was the point of the collected edition I had of the Invisibles. It's been fixed, and I'm going, well, I actually think an abstract artist can really bring a lot to abstract writers or abstract concepts because it actually is. It's not about nailing it down visually. It's about suggesting what it is.
Yes.
And that's important. But Morrison, I guess, didn't agree.
Right.
Who knows? I haven't actually seen the finished work.
Right.
Maybe it was bad, but I think it sort of speaks to it because again, it relates to time travel.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to this need to literalize and make more realistic again these abstract ideas. And what I like about this is Weston has this hyper detailed art in this series, but then there are moments that are incongruent, like they don't make sense visually, but they're playful and you don't mind them. In fact, one of the things consistently I've seen with people talking about Timebreakers, again, I'm glad you suggest we do this because I haven't seen a lot of conversation on Timebreakers, but one of the things I've seen consistently pulled out is the art. People talk about the art being great. Chris Weston's been great, blah, blah, blah. I want to stress the same thing you just did. I think it's a wonderful collaboration. I think the two of them working together, having fun, just playing with the detail a bit. That it's just wonderful to see it play out on the page.
Yeah. So should we? I don't know how we can talk about this plot. It's 5 issues. It's actually okay. So as I mentioned, there's this woman named Angela Attenborough. It's 1958. She's married. She's in a kind of 1958 marriage. and her friends are telling her she should have a kid to make herself happy, and she's like, I don't want a child, just for something to do. Men never need to look for ways to occupy themselves. She decides to go for a walk in the woods. In the woods, these three strangers materialize before her. There's this guy, Lewis, who's blind, and this woman, and the Greek. And they give her a mysterious disc and tell her to commit crimes with it. They tell her just think about it, and she's like, what? Anyway, next time we see Angela, it's 1962, 4 years later, and she's a jewel thief in Paris. And she's figured out how to open safes and stuff with this disc, which has been given to her. And she discovers she goes looks at what her husband's been doing. He's a doctor. She finds out he's been doing some unethical stuff, and she leaves him. Meanwhile, in the headquarters, which is called Paradox Pond, I just found it in my notes, Angel, who is the future version of Angela, comes back, and she started a paradox which exhausts her. Now, there's some stuff in this series which is, should we use the term loosey-goosey? So...
Pretty loosey-goosey.
It's very loosey-goosey in the sense that, later on in this issue, they go back into the Time Breakers go to Paris, 1962. There's a big fight, and one of them, N'Chaka, gets killed. And Angel says to herself, oh my God, why did I let this happen? Why didn't I remember it? Rachel Pollack never explains why she doesn't remember. People seem to lose memories when they need to. In order to keep the time paradox going, they need to not remember that person died on that day or whatever. But another thing that happens is when they bring Angela back tonight, so Angel brings Angela from Paris back to the time base, Paradox Pond. And between panels, Angel disappears. And she says, where did she go? Angela says, where did she go? But we never had a flash of light or anything like that. She just turns around, and in the next panel, she's just not there. Almost like, imagine if Chris Weston forgot to draw. Almost like that. She just suddenly, there was no special effects or anything. But that's not explained, how she disappeared from the timeline or why there aren't two Angelas running around now. It's just like, this is just what needs to happen for the time loop to close itself.
It's the suggestion I felt was that Angel is consolidated at the end of the story.
Yes.
There is an Angel at the end.
Yeah. Well, Angela becomes Angel. She becomes the person who goes back to recruit herself, which she says she's not going to do, but then she does it.
She never becomes the person who recruits herself during the events of the story itself. But by the end of the story, she is that person, and that event has occurred.
Yes.
So there is timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, as David Tennant once said, stuff going on here. Yeah. But it actually works for me because, again, I felt as if it was just suggesting this is this individual consciousness's ability to construct this as a sequence of events. Whereas the actual entity is present in all these different points in time. And your point earlier on was an excellent point about making the quantum reality a macro reality is, I think, in Pollack's conception of this story, where identity comes in. Yeah. Identity is a thing that can be reversed and sped up and broken and fixed and evolving. That's what identity is. And, as somebody who is not party to this experience, but I'm at risk of maybe simplifying things, but I feel as if that sort of relates to the concept of gender as a construct that is a feature of trans literature. Yeah. And that seems to be at play here.
Well, she talked also in the afterword of issue 1, she talked about being inspired by All You Zombies. Which was...
Sorry.
Yeah, by Heinlein, which is about a person becoming their own mother and father. And switching genders.
I was recently reading about that as well, because there was an Australian movie with Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook.
Predestination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is more or less the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's a narrative there. The other one I would think of is Cloud Atlas.
Okay.
The adaptation of Cloud Atlas by the Wachowskis, where gender and race as well, which was controversial for a lot of people, but gender was just completely up in the air. Cloud Atlas.
Right.
Because the different times that we see play out across of Cloud Atlas, it's the same actors in each of them.
Yeah.
But they're playing different characters and they're playing different genders and different races. And it was completely up in the air. And that seems to speak to that same notion of the constructed modes of being that we interact with this world with. Our racial perspective, our gender perspective, our our sexual perspective, who we are attracted to. All these things are fair game.
Yeah.
And time travel becomes interesting. This is why I mentioned Moorcock earlier, because I feel like he touched on something similar with Dance at the End of Time. Time travel becomes interesting when you actually start exploring identity. Because the problem with the idea of fixing time is it's all about the status quo.
Right.
And that seems to relate to the idea of the time traveler as a heroic, fixed identity.
Right.
In and of himself. And it's typically himself. He's restoring time. Whereas Timebreakers advances the idea, no, let's ultimately break time in order for it to be reborn. That's what we're doing here.
Yes, in order for life to exist in the first place, and you need life to exist for time to exist, as we've established in the place where Paradox Pond, the headquarters, is located at a time before any life exists at all. Now, this leads us to our antagonists, which are this group led by this guy named Gershon, and he follows the teachings of some god named Yochanan, and they're set up in Israel, 22 BC. But his thing is, they know the paradoxes need to exist for time to exist, but they want to destroy time. He wants to free us from the prison of time, and he says, soon time will end forever, and all souls will be released from the prison of life. So they're the Marty McFly. They're trying to keep the paradoxes from existing. They want time to be linear, and that will destroy time, which is the opposite of what we normally get from one of these stories. Right, and they're called the Knowers, and they're cheekily called the Know-It-Alls by the Time Breakers, but they call themselves the Knowers. Right.
More discussion of Time Breakers coming up. Old comics can be pretty amusing. Don't you love it? The dollar sign on the bag.
Yeah.
That means it has money in it. And the early issues of Amazing Spider-Man are no exception.
And there's this line about Mark Twain in here, which has to be the funniest thing Stan Lee ever wrote.
Join me, Tim, along with a rotating cast of Emmet.
Yes, let's Snopes.com this issue of Spider-Man.
Patrick.
Haha, I'm here. Now you must feel my wrath.
And Kumar.
To say you just hit the jackpot about herself is so great.
As we make our way through the transition from Ditko to Ramita, and Peter Parker's transition from being a high school student with a doting aunt,
Aunt May's worrying about Peter, Peter's worrying about Aunt May,
to a college student with his own pad, facing the big questions in life.
Why is Gwen having a party on a Sunday?
It's Spider-Man transitions, along with Spidey's early years discussed in Spider-Man 1963, when Pete's romantic life was nothing but stress.
Oh, he hates me because he looked at my coffee cup.
We raise all the big questions. Why do you put these two wimpy guys in suits and ties to guard a super strong man? Our patrons are enjoying Spider-Man transitions. Paul Spence wrote, "Gentlemen, you provided some very funny commentary on this issue. This was a great episode and it was very funny. Keep up the great work."
It just seemed unlikely that, he would go into melee with the Rhino and not get his arm snapped.
Support us at patreon.com/deconcomics for at least $4 a month to hear our monthly podcast as we move toward issue 50.
This is the last face you'll see. And then he puts on the Green Goblin mask. He's like, no, this is the last face you'll see.
That's Spider-Man Transitions. At To the Batpoles podcast, we look at the many sides of our favorite hero, Batman. For example, Encyclopedia Batman.
It's the basic formula for escaping from the Siamese human knot. I just recalled it.
Civic Responsibility Batman.
Only a criminal would disguise himself as a licensed bonded guard, yet callously park in front of a fire hydrant.
Impish Humor Batman.
Look at him, Robin. That crooked bird's going crazy.
And more. See if you can identify other sides of the Caped Crusader, and then join us at To the Batpoles podcast, available wherever podcasts are found or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Batman has many sides, but can we trust him to save the day?
You can be sure, if it's Batman.
Okay, so it's the land of Israel, 22 BC. I think that's an important point. We should identify that. But I think that's really interesting because the Timebreakers locate themselves in this period before history, before existence, before life on Earth. It's the period where life can possibly take place.
Yes.
The knowers, or know-it-alls, they locate their base in Israel in 22 BC. So you have this location they've chosen, or has been chosen for them, as we discover, which is at the root of all Abrahamic faiths.
Yes.
So you've got Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all circling around this locale. And the suggestion is you've got the Timebreakers who represent like freewheeling evolutionary chaos, and you've got the knowers who are fundamentalists.
Yes.
They're fundamentalists about time travel.
Yes.
They're trying to expunge, kill, hunt down and destroy the Timebreakers because there's a purity of time that they believe needs to be restored. That's fascinating, and it's just a really interesting contrast. Just in that sighting of that location, just that little caption that says this is where this is where this character is, we go, okay, I'm with you. I know what we're doing now, you know. And then in that issue 2, we have the contrasting origin stories of the two groups.
Yes.
And the origin stories both begin with the location.
Yes.
Where are these two things? Where do these ideas? What is the primordial soup for both of these ideas? And it's very telling what Pollack chooses.
Yes.
As settings.
Yes.
Because I think it sort of establishes for the reader, okay, one is religious, one is like evolutionarily interested.
Yes.
That's the conflict.
Yeah.
I don't want to simplify this over much because I think there's more at play here.
Yeah.
But and certainly the conflict itself ultimately isn't a conflict, which comes into the Invisibles again. I keep thinking of the Invisibles because it's around the same time.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating. The Invisibles got celebrated for these kinds of ideas, whereas Pollack's, particularly this one, has been, I've seen it written off as lightweight, and this is why I keep repeating the word playful.
Yes.
Because I don't think it's lightweight. I think it's playful. It doesn't take itself seriously.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not serious. It just means it's fun. Nothing wrong with fun.
So we should also mention here, because actually there's a lot of table setting here. Because the concepts are so big, even though you think you know time travel stories, it's really approaching things in a different way. So the main thing is they're at the beginning of time, quote unquote, or pre-life. And the Timebreakers are looking for something called the Great Paradox, which is going to trigger the creation of life. They don't know what it is. They're trying to figure out what the Great Paradox is going to be. And we don't get that really until issue 2. And also in issue 2, close to the end, we learn that time is being destroyed from the future going backwards. And this is also causing problems. So it's causing paradoxes, which is fine in a sense because they want the paradoxes. But for example, if a person was born in the year 2050, let's say, and now this time storm, I think they call it, is rolling backwards and it's destroyed the 21st century. So the people that we see in front of us who were born in 2050 were never born because time doesn't exist past that point in time. But they think that the Great Paradox, which is going to create life, can also stop the destruction of time itself. And because they're at the beginning of time, they don't know how much of the future has been destroyed already. They're not sure. Like, she came from 1958, and they're not sure if 58 still exists or not. And then we get a couple of interesting issues, which are really, I don't want to say filler, but they're like not so much about the paradox.
Setup.
Yeah,
they're setting up the plates to start spinning them in the final issue.
So in issue 3, we get a lot of stuff about, it's 10 years later after issue 2, so Angela is now Angel. And we get a lot of background about this Indian mathematician. And we also learn how they recruit people. Actually, this is quite important, is often if you're from a certain types of cultures, they will approach you as a god. They will masquerade as a deity. and give you some information like here's the formulas you need to travel through time or something like that, or here's what you need to develop this device, or they'll give them the device in some form or other. And then that person will be worshipful of that deity that they met that time, and it will cause them to develop these things which are needed for time travel. So in issue 3, we get this Indian mathematician. There's a lot of background about him. And Angel feels he's very innocent. He's kind of a pure soul. And she feels really bad about deceiving him and tricking him into joining their cause without him even really knowing it. He's still on his deathbed. And she approaches him again dressed as this deity.
How did you feel about that? Because I did. That was the one squiffy bit for me. That
she showed up in Blueface.
Blueface, yeah, like she's pretending to be this goddess.
But
also, I mean, no, okay. I'll quickly just touch on one. The behavior of the god felt very Virgin Mary to me. So it felt very. Pollack is herself Jewish, so I'm not saying she's Christian, but it felt like a very sort of Christian culture idea of what a visitation of the Godhead would be like.
Yes.
And the other thing was, as you say, the blue skin. I mean, that's ridiculous. There is no racial group in this world who are blue skinned, unless you're drinking lots of colloidal silver, but which apparently some guy did. I saw it on Reddit the other day. I don't know why I did that to my brain. But the god is depicted as being an Indian person with blue skin, and here's this white lady putting blue paint on herself. She knows it's the wrong thing. I mean, she doesn't say it's wrong because I'm impersonating this other race. She knows it's wrong on a deeper level of taking over this guy's life. I know what you mean, but I didn't really take issue with it. I felt like there was much greater evils being perpetrated to save the universe, if you know what I mean. In that she admits to, and that's why she visits him again when she's not supposed to speak to him. That was the bit I thought was like, the person on their deathbed and they see the Virgin Mary and
you're kind of right, because I've actually been reading this book about Indian monsters, demons, and ghosts, and it's always possession. The thing, it's almost never like, well, no, I shouldn't say that. It can be visitation, but it's usually like you've run across this thing and it's super bad luck to have seen it or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
But a lot of the stories are like, oh yeah, you do something bad and then the spirit takes you over or something. But this book is 500 pages. There's hundreds of various ghosts and demons and things listed in it. So it's very hard to say, but you're right. It is very, it does seem like a Virgin Mary or visitation by an angel kind of thing. Very much something like that. There's some loosey-goosiness in this issue too, where the knowers, which are our antagonists, can detect breakers, I guess, through some device when they're traveling through time, but they can't detect their targets. They're very specific about this. But then it's not really explained why. I guess does she say there's time energy or something, or she describes it there's some time, they're drained, like they have temporal energy is what it's described as. So they have these beams, these ray beams, paradox disruptors they're called, which can drain the temporal energy from the enemies of truth, is how they describe it. So I guess they're also able to detect time breakers just through their temporal energy. I guess I don't know. She knows not to get too deep into these things because they're just going to get in the way. But she kind of, there are all the thing I love, another thing I really love about the series is everything that you think is established ends up being part of a closed loop. Almost every single thing. I don't think there's anything that escapes that is not part of a time loop where actually somebody came back in time from 50 years later and gave this guy that technology. The guy that invented this gun, it was actually given to him. They go through the whole Shakespeare thing too, where it's like, there's this character who copied Hamlet and gave it to Shakespeare, so nobody actually wrote Hamlet.
My note was Hamilton Shaw, Chekhov's character, because he's literally introduced.
Yes,
he's introduced exactly as you just introduced him.
Yeah,
and then Angela just insults him.
Yeah,
he's no longer on panel.
Yeah,
at all. He's not in the room.
Yeah,
basically, And then at the last issue, he comes back because it turns out he has an idea because of what he did. And he comes back.
Right.
So this is time travel fiction as a card sharp game.
Yeah.
It's just, do you think it's over here? It's actually over here.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's where the playfulness comes in for me. It's like a knowing look to the camera. Look at his character, Hamilton Shaw. Look, hello, Hamilton. All right, push him off screen. He's not here anymore. His absence is noticeable.
Yes.
And I feel, just as you said before, where Angel is no longer there on panel, because Angel is Angela, so she's no longer there, because they are the same person. Now, Angela doesn't remember what she's already done as Angel, but then Angel didn't know what she'd already done when she became Angel. So, hence, that's the paradox. But yeah, Hamilton Shaw just made me laugh out loud, and his sort of reluctant involvement in Angel's idea is the highlight of the entire series for me.
Yeah. So was there an explanation of why? So when he goes back in time and does his God play, he's stumbling over his words. But when we had the flashback to that, he was not. Now, did we get an explanation of that somehow? I feel like no.
It's subjective memory.
Right. Okay.
It's the memory of the person we're there with.
Yes.
And then we're seeing him be witnessed by Angel.
Yeah.
So the version of events is different.
Yeah.
She knows who he is.
Yeah.
So she's not in awe of him.
Right.
Whereas this other individual has been retelling this event for all his recruits to knowers for however long he's been doing that. And, and he's, again, not only is the antagonist group, associated with fundamentalism by being clearly connected to Abrahamism, the idea of all the different Jewish, Christian, Islamic faiths. But he also is one of those people who's adding up the years from the Bible to work out how old the earth is.
Yes.
That's what he's doing with his spare time in the 19th century. That's what he was doing before he got involved in this. He's one of those people who was adding up the years.
Yeah.
And that was something I remember being very fascinated with when I think Terry Pratchett started making fun of it in Good Omens. And Good Omens is a book I read like multiple times. Neil Gaiman referenced there again. But in Good Omens, there's some joke about the various would-be theologians like adding up all the years in the Bible and coming up short. It's like, well, that can't be right. And doing it again.
Yeah.
This poor song.
Well, it's interesting here, too, because it's in direct contrast to what the Time Breakers are doing, where they're at the start of time. And yeah. So issue 4, another interesting thing that happens is it's the bit of the loosiness of it is, so they have a discussion. I actually loved, so Angel ends up in a relationship with this guy, Leo, I think it was. I actually loved their relationship. I thought it was they were a lovely couple, I thought. But he's kind of from a similar time period as her. I think he's from the 60s. He's a bit proto-hippie maybe, or beatniky. But they have a discussion about, well, look, we're trying to start life by having the Great Paradox happen. But what if we just have a baby here? Or what if we take our suits and the bacteria can be the first life on Earth? The bacteria that comes from just taking our helmets off. And he says, well, life that doesn't come from the paradox wouldn't take. So we've just got let's just invent a rule to keep this thing going. And it's just that, it's got to be a big enough paradox, otherwise the life won't. And he says life seeded by its own descendants is too simple.
But also, it's like, if you take direct action, you are breaking. You're not actually creating anything new. Yes. You're simply interfering with what's already there. What we ultimately learn is if you take no action at all, that's a contradiction.
Yes,
and then something happens because the impossible has occurred.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to stage a miracle.
Yes.
And like what that scene's about is, like she's saying, well, logically it would follow that if we introduce biological matter here, it would then grow and evolve and become life. And he's saying, well, no, like that'd be a waste of time because you've reduced this to this crude, simple formula. We need an impossible event.
Yes. Yes.
And what ultimately is depicted on page is a divine occurrence. Like it's like the thumb of God coming down from the sky and like just tipping the scales. That's what's happened.
Yeah.
And I just, again, it's that's where the core idea of this is, as well, time travel is about the impossible.
Yeah, that's the exact word they use, is they say a circle of time so perfect and so impossible it will begin the evolution of life. Yeah. And so Angel goes back in time to see herself before she got married even, which is not what happened in her closed circle as far as we know, because she didn't remember meeting herself in 1954. So I guess it's just another paradox. But anyway, at the time, she goes back there and the time storm is hitting in 1954. Her timeline is being destroyed there. Again, there's a thing where only Angel can see the time storm. Everyone else can feel the wind, but it just looks like blue skies to them. Again, why is this? It's not explained why only the time breakers can see the time storm and not the people living in the actual time that it's happening.
So she breaks her loop.
Yes.
But then her time gets erased.
Yeah, it would have already been erased in 58. If it's at 54, it means it didn't happen anyway.
Yeah, she's outside of time now.
Yes, yeah.
So, I remember when I was reading X-Men comics in the 90s, that was the great descriptor of the character Bishop. He's the time-displaced X-Men.
Right.
Which is their way of getting around the fact that, like, he's clearly interfering with all these events that lead to his own birth.
Yeah.
Circumstances of his own birth. Well, he's time-displaced. It's not having a direct impact on him.
Yeah.
He can do whatever he wants, Yeah. Whereas here's the opposite of that. That displacement actually is important. That's how this actually has to happen. I find that it's just a completely different approach to the notion of a time travel in fiction.
Yeah.
And I guess that stems from our need for there to be this orderliness to our fiction.
Yeah.
And Pollack just rejects that and says, no, let's go the other way.
Yeah. So I was going to say, so basically in issue 5, the Timebreakers decide to do nothing, and that causes the paradox, which starts the evolution of life. I also wrote in my notes, somebody says time is the body of God, and I can't remember who said it, but it seems related to what you said at the very start of the episode.
It's when they kidnap the knower.
Yeah.
And they're arguing with him, and that's their way of trying to get him on side.
Right.
Time is actually, you've been lied to. Time is the body of God.
Time is the body of God. And you're also right that I forgot that at the very end, once they've saved the universe, or created it, however you want to describe it, they're back in the 21st century, and she's back to being a jewel thief or whatever. And so there was a potential for further adventures. Who was Lewis sitting with, Lewis, the leader of the Timebreakers, sitting with in the very last panel? Who did you?
It's the different versions of him.
Oh, okay.
So it's Robert.
Yep.
And the person who recruits Robert and Lewis, and it's Robert Louis Borges.
Oh, got it. Okay.
That's where it comes from.
Yes.
So Borges was dead. Borges was dead. Borges was blind.
Oh my God! Yes. Okay.
Of his being blind. And the idea of the labyrinth.
Oh, there's 3 of them. You're right. It's not even. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Wow.
It's just the 3 names. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's sort of he's attending this performance with himself and himself.
Yes. Yes.
And it sort of ends on that moment of, oh well, if you say it's good, I'm sure it is. It's like that idea.
Yes. If you say it, Lewis, I shall never doubt it.
Yeah.
Okay. The end. And then then it says the end. Wow, what an adventure.
Can I just say, if anyone's listening to this and you would like to read a collected volume of Timebreakers, you cannot.
Yeah.
Unless you speak Italian.
Oh, okay.
Because there is an Italian edition of Timebreakers, a collected edition of Timebreakers in Italian. God bless Mama Italia. They appreciate a good comic, huh?
Yeah.
The fumetti, huh? You can buy Timebreakers in Italian on Amazon and Book Depository and all the different sites. It's there, which I think is just brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Otherwise, look for the back issues or troll the internet. You'll find it, which is what we do.
eBay is what I've resorted to. Yeah.
Yeah. It's something else, and I'm kind of, I don't know what. I mean, it's Chris Weston art. I don't know why it wouldn't have done. Well, as you said, I guess it did well for Helix, but I think the whole Helix. I think the marketing there might have been part of it.
Yeah, they prematurely cut their losses, and I think when we have to remember this is 1997. It finishes in 1997. May 1997 was the last issue, I think, and according to the Indicia. Yeah. And you're looking at a period of complete chaos in the U.S. comics industry. You've got the upset of Image. Finally, the other publishers are now looking to Image for inspiration of what to do next. This is where Wildstorm really sort of begins to rise in the Ascended. This is when you have the Heroes Reborn event. Yeah. Where you've got the Image people coming into Marvel again, being told Marvel is now being told what to do by the people who left them because they were being under the thumb of editorial. So everything's been upended, and this is Wizard Magazine's heyday. This is where it's all about exploitational sexy girls and hyperviolence and cool doodads on a belt. That's what this.
Yeah.
And into this mix comes Rachel Pollack and Chris Weston with all this
really
time
heady science fiction fun science fiction series. Yeah, you're right.
I do think it deserves to be republished currently.
Yeah.
I think there's a space for it. I think you could, as I said before, looking at things like Loki and Doctor Who, and that's your audience. These people who like the timey-wimey stuff. This is your book.
Yeah.
Indigo Prime. I know John Smith has had long periods of absence from comics, and he, I believe it's related to health issues. If I'm wrong, please someone out there correct me. But Indigo Prime has also come back with another creative team, so it's not John Smith writing.
Okay.
It's different writers, different artists. Indigo Prime also has this completely ridiculous approach to time travel and messing with timelines and just being completely chaotic. So there's a taste for this kind of thing. This feels like a 2000 AD comic, but it's a DC comic, which I think is really interesting.
Yes. There's something about it, though. The focus on emotions seems not very 2000 AD to me. There's a lot of attention to Angela's feelings at every time period, especially so. Yeah, it's different. It's really different and special. And I read it twice for this recording, and I loved it. I totally loved it. Okay, any final thoughts?
I think you just said it.
Okay. Excellent.
Timebreakers was published by DC. As Emmet mentioned, it's not published in English by anyone currently, but of course used back issues are available online. If you've enjoyed this week's show or any other Deconstructing Comics episodes, tell your friends. Share your favorite episodes on your social media. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube by clicking our social media buttons at deconstructingcomics.com. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. When DC Comics failed to get the rights to make a comics adaptation of The Planet of the Apes, Jack Kirby was asked to come up with something similar. What he came up with was a series whose world does bear quite a resemblance to the Apes setting, but with a bunch of crazy Kirby sci-fi elements mixed in. Next week, Emmet and I resume our look at Kirby's DC years as we discuss the first 12 issues of Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.